418 HIPAA breaches happened in 2019 alone. Okay, maybe you don't think that's that bad. And if you're comparing it to the total number of organizations that need to follow this rule, it's not. But what if I told you that those 418 HIPAA breaches led to almost 35 million Americans having their PHI compromised? To add even more perspective on what I just said, 35 million people is almost 10% of the entire population of the United States. At that rate, it would only take another 9 years until the entire US population's PHI is leaked. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into preventing a HIPAA breach, but when it happens, a few specific things are set in motion. Of course, depending on the type of breach, your employee who committed it will get disciplined. But I went over that in a previous video. Before disciplining even happens though, certain steps are set in motion. Hi everyone, I'm Matt from Tactics, and today I'm going to explain exactly what happens when there's a HIPAA breach. Before we get started though, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the button below. While you're down there, hit that alert bell icon next to it as well, so when we post new helpful content, you get notified. It could take days, weeks, months, or even years before an organization realizes a HIPAA breach even happened. This is why cybersecurity technology and compliance processes are important. Both of these aspects are far enough along that it's possible to know the moment a breach occurs today. Unfortunately, not every organization has both of those factors put in place still in 2020. But that's a story for a different time. When a HIPAA breach occurs, 3 phases happen afterward: investigation, correction, and notification if necessary. First, during the investigation phase, organizations confirm the who, what, when, why, how, and how much with the persons involved, including persons who committed the alleged violation, persons who may have received PHI improperly, and other relevant witnesses. Confirm the nature and amount of the PHI that was accessed, used, or disclosed, and why they accessed or disclosed the PHI. Ensure there was no redisclosure, and that there will be no further redisclosure. Out of all of the phases after a HIPAA breach occurs, investigation happens most often. That's because it's the first step. This is also because it kicks everything off. Also, many times you'll launch a breach investigation and find out that it wasn't a breach. If this occurs, you're in luck. If the investigation phase proves that there was a breach that took place, it's time for the second phase, or correction. This step is sometimes referred to as the mitigation process. In other words, this step is where you actually fix or attempt to fix the HIPAA breach that occurred. Mitigation may include retrieving, deleting, or destroying improperly disclosed PHI, terminating access or changing passwords, remote wiping mobile devices, modifying policies or practices, warning recipients of potential penalties for further violations. And when it comes to HIPAA breaches, the sooner you correct the problem, the less of a penalty you'll face. Specifically, a covered entity may avoid HIPAA penalties if it did not act with willful neglect and corrects the problem at hand within 30 days. You may not be able to avoid the fact that there was a leak in the boat, but you can ensure that it doesn't continue to leak by patching up the hole by doing things like changing processes, implementing new safeguards, modifying policies, and training employees on HIPAA. After you've made the necessary corrective action, the last step is the optional notification phase. This phase is only optional because it's based on the severity of the attack. If a HIPAA breach affects 500 or more individuals, a covered entity must notify the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services of the breach without unreasonable delay and in no later than 60 calendar days from the discovery of the breach. Failure to do so will likely constitute as willful neglect, thereby triggering mandatory penalties if discovered. But if a HIPAA breach is this severe, the government isn't the only group to notify. If the breach was caused by a business associate, then they must notify the covered entity that they work with within 60 days after discovery so that the covered entity may provide the required notices to others. Covered entities must also notify the affected individual or their personal representative without unreasonable delay, but in the event, no longer than 60 days following discovery as well. Furthermore, if the breach involves more than 500 persons in a state, the covered entity must also notify local media within 60 days of discovery. A covered entity is required to maintain documentation concerning its breach analysis and/or reporting for 6 years. The key to all of this section is 60 days. When a HIPAA breach occurs, it's a scary time for your organization. The last thing you want to do as a healthcare provider is give away your patient's sensitive information to a hacker who has malicious intent. But as I mentioned in the introduction of this video, this happens more often than you might think. It happens so often that most cybersecurity professionals believe that it's guaranteed that your organization will experience a HIPAA breach at some point. Hopefully they're wrong and you can go about your day-to-day without a cybersecurity attack heading towards you like a ticking time bomb. But in the event that it does happen, at least you now know the proper steps to take. If you'd like to learn more about what happens when there's a HIPAA breach, reach out to eTactics. And you already made it this far into the video, so you might as well like it, share it, and comment below. Well, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to our YouTube channel.